Well, the big supply chain problems, we're all dealing with it, and we all know that the shortages we're facing, and they're talking about that turkeys will be hard to come by and that Christmas is going to be rough. If you haven't got your Christmas presents yet, you may not be getting them until, well, quite a while. We thought we'd bring in somebody that could enlighten us a little bit on why this is happening. Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Committee. He also serves as the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. It's good to have you on with us, Mark. Thanks for joining me today.
Johnny, it's a privilege to be on with you and talk a little bit about what's going on in the world. There's plenty of news out there, but this is really kind of big news as well, the supply chain, and we think it's kind of an immediate problem, but unfortunately this is a problem that has a history, and maybe we can chat a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, why don't you enlighten us? Number one, what has caused this to happen? Because it seems like it kind of grew and then really went into overdrive. What has really been behind this?
Yeah, well, there's some truth to the fact that the demand for goods has increased over the last year and a half as we were all kind of stuck at home and couldn't go out and do the things that we normally do, and so demand has increased a bit. But what it's exposed, Johnny B, is, and like the COVID situation has exposed lots of things that heretofore we wouldn't have paid a whole lot of attention to. But the port system in America, basically, we are the world's largest importer, and two of the ports in the United States on the West Coast, Los Angeles and Long Beach, are basically responsible for about 40% of all the imports that come into the United States, and that's pretty obvious because most of our imports come from China and the Far East, and so it's natural they end up on the West Coast, and the 29 ports that make up the port system on the West Coast. That system is controlled by the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, and these guys are really interesting in the ability that they have to control the port system and how products move in and out of the ports, and how they move on tractor trailers, and how they move on rail cars. And one of the things that's been exposed by this kind of situation at the ports right now is the fact that our port system is really wanting. In fact, the World Bank did a port performance index last year, and amazingly, they basically rated 350 ports around the world, and they found out that Los Angeles and Long Beach, our two most important ports, are rated 328th and 333rd in efficiency and the ability to get a ship in, get it to the dock, get it unloaded, and get it out. And so when you have a kind of an increase in that flow, that kind of inefficiency is exposed. And unfortunately, a lot of that story is written by kind of the union agreements that are basically agreed to by shippers and in this case on the West Coast, the Pacific Maritime Association, that basically blocks any kind of automation or any kind of technological advancement that would speed, up the ability to get a container off a ship, onto a truck, into a warehouse, onto a railhead, into a tractor trailer that would bring it into the country and into the economy. And so these rules are really antiquated. I mean, back in 2002, there was a major strike on the West Coast, and that strike, the union went out on strike over the fact that the shippers and the employers there wanted to introduce scanners and sensors and barcodes on the port so they could better track containers. And of course, that caused a job action. In 1971, a 130-day strike at the port, and that, Johnny, was over whether or not goods would come in containers. And now containers obviously are the way to move products from, over the ocean and actually on chassis and on trucks and on trains. And they protested that because they believe that it cost them jobs, and unfortunately, that monopoly power has basically manifested itself today with the kind of exposing the inefficiencies of our port system.
So basically, I mean, it would help us tremendously if you would get rid of these port unions and as you say in this piece that I read, that replace them with robots. That would be the best way to go.
Well, I'm not saying the best way, but it's certainly allowing automation to basically come in real time like it has in so many institutions that we deal with. I mean, we're now talking about cars that will drive themselves, and, there's so much technology out there. And the fact is, Johnny B, you hold on to a cell phone that, used to look like a block of cheese and now is, fits in your coat pocket. And,
right.
And you didn't even have a cell phone back, 25, 30 years ago. I don't want to date myself, but, it used to be you had to be, put a dime in it for a quarter in a payphone. iPhone, I guess it was the last time I checked. But anyway, that automation is important, and the idea that we can move things faster in an economy that's growing and an economy that's robust, I mean, you have to do that. And, it's interesting because the Teamster union sometimes fights the port union because the Teamsters basically want truck drivers to be able to go in and get containers, get them out, get through the gates, and make that profitable for them. But yet, government stepped in, regulation has stepped in, and it kind of slows that whole process down. And when you basically object to any type of automation, you've got a problem, and something we need to think about because, the economy probably won't get smaller. The desire for goods won't be reduced, but yet these port systems are antiquated to the degree that, the American port system, the two major ports are ranked 328 and 333 in a world index of ports. And I mean, we're talking about Africa and all kinds of different ports around the world. That just can't stand, that's for sure.
No, and we've had people on here that, listeners that have asked, well, why can't they, for having such a backup on the West Coast, why can they not just go to Florida or maybe, the East Coast? And go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Ron DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, has invited shippers to end up in Jacksonville, and some have. But here's the bottom line. I mean, first of all, these container ships, some of these container ships can carry about 20,000 containers, what they're called TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. Right. And so when one of those comes to the West Coast, in order to get it through the Panama Canal and up the other side into the Gulf or up on the East Coast, cost an additional $3,000 per container. So you can do the math, Johnny B., and that cost gets put somewhere, and who do you think covers that cost? I mean, that's not a trick question.
It's us.
So yeah, that's right. You got it. I'm glad you answered it because I was dumbfounded there for a minute. But no, that's the serious nature of it. But we can still try that. There's a new port. The newest port in the United States is called the Hugh Leatherman Port that opened up in Charleston, South Carolina. It's the most advanced port in the nation. It was over $1 billion investment. Phase 1 is completed. It opened up on March 21st, and immediately the ILA, which is the union on the East Coast that manages 15 ports on the East Coast, filed lawsuits against two of the largest world shippers, Hapag-Lloyd from Germany and then OOCL, which is Oriental Overseas Carrier Lines, and basically threatened them and said, if you bring your ships into that new port, because there are non-union guys working there and people that are not part of the ILA, they threatened them and actually filed a $300 million lawsuit in New Jersey saying no one could unload at that port. So we have the most efficient, the newest port in America, basically sitting idle. For the last 15 days, only 3 ships have gone into that newest and most modern port that we have because of a dispute over union versus non-union jobs. I mean, when they have that type of power to scare off and intimidate these major shippers around the world and say, look, if you go there, we're going to file a lawsuit, and we're going to make it difficult for you to deliver and go to that port. That is a real indication of some significant problems that should be addressed. But unfortunately, the Biden administration, even though they just passed an infrastructure bill that has a port piece of it, basically $17 billion, you won't believe this, Johnny, but there are provisions in that particular section of the bill for port infrastructure that says none of the money that's being allocated here can be used for automation.
Unbelievable. And especially with the shortages that we're facing for, Thanksgiving coming up, and you also have Christmas, and not to mention, like even myself, our heater in our house needed repaired, and we had to wait on a part. And it just seems like everything is just slow to a standstill.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we can do about that, and one of the things we should be doing about that and thinking about as a country, is bringing some of that manufacturing capability back to the United States. That was happening over the last 4 years, but with this new administration, with the dramatic increase in energy costs, with the basically shutting down energy exploration anywhere in the United States, shutting down pipelines, increasing the cost of energy and new regulations, and these types of the increase in taxes, it basically is telling investors and those people that want to build and manufacture things that they need to go elsewhere to find opportunities to do that, and that's not good for the country. Tennessee, being one of the 27 right-to-work states, rank-and-file workers there have a little more control over their unions. They can choose whether or not to support them financially. We believe that type of accountability basically holds these union officials accountable to their rank-and-file workers who they claim to represent, and basically helps to to reform this policy when on the West Coast, in Washington and Oregon and California, if you're on the docks, you have to pay union dues or fees in order to work. If you don't pay, you don't work. It's that simple. And so union officials out there have no incentive to get better, to be, to increase and invite automation and do the job faster and help the truck drivers and the railway employees and the warehouse people. They just sit back and say, look, you do it our way or no way.
And that seems to be the things with unions. I have nothing against union members, but union leaders, they just seem to prop up mediocrity in every part of business to me, and including workers.
Yeah, and that's what we find. I mean, in states that don't have right-to-work laws, where rank-and-file workers choose voluntarily to financially support because they can choose otherwise, in Tennessee and the 26 other states that have right-to-work, but in the states that don't, I mean, we're learning that from, the United Auto Workers Union. I mean, they today announced another one of their top union officials was indicted on embezzlement and, stealing money and using credit cards to gamble and buy, high-priced purses and shoes and movie tickets, all kinds of stuff. And the reason why that happens is because they're not accountable. If you have the power granted by the federal government to force someone to pay you in order to work, that's a pretty unique power, and not many people have that. And that's why, again, right to work is not against unions. We just believe that the rank-and-file workers should be able to hold these people accountable. And we think that's one of the solutions to the port problem that's jamming up the supply chain right now.
Now, I don't mean to put you in the image of being a soothsayer, but when do you think that things might get a little bit better as far as the supply chain problem?
Boy, Johnny, if I could do that, somebody would ask me to be an expert on this, but I'm not. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. The contract for the ILWU out on the West Coast, that union, comes up in 2022. And so right now they're kind of in negotiation mode, and so that's not going to help. And I hope that this White House will step in, but based on their past experience and just over the last 8 or 9 months, I mean, they have decided that not only are they against rank-and-file union members, but they're in favor of big union bosses. I mean, if they really were the most pro-union president in the United States, operating engineers and welders and construction trade workers on the Keystone Pipeline wouldn't be on the unemployment line right now. They were all union jobs that were destroyed in the first week of this presidency by shutting down that pipeline. And, so to say that this is the most pro-union president in the country is just a lie. He's the most pro-union official president in the country because the union officials use that rank-and-file money to fund into his political campaign to help him get elected. And boy, he doesn't want to address the issue where basically rubber meets the road when it comes to the ports. It's an issue that needs to be addressed, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So that's not good for turkeys. It's not good for your heater, and it's not good for Christmas presents. I think I can say that with some certainty. Well,
what it takes is we're going to have to go to the polls when it comes to 2022 and 2024 and vote this stuff out, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Johnny, that's our chance in this government of this grand experiment in self-government. We the people, it does matter, and we have to pay attention, and we've got to keep track of what these folks are doing up here in Washington and what they're doing in Nashville and what they're doing in Sacramento and all across the country. We have an obligation to do that. We need to do it, and for you to raise these issues is a really important part of that grand experiment in self-government for sure. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for coming on today, Mark. I really appreciate it. The president of the National Right to Work Committee, also the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. If they want to read more about you, Mark, is there anywhere they can go?
Yeah, they can find us on that amazing internet at www.nrtw.org. They can find out about their legal rights in the workplace, and if they want to find out about legislation and follow some of the things we're talking about specifically here, they can go to nrtwc.org, nrtwc.org.
Sounds good, Mark. I really appreciate you coming on, and thank you for all the good work you do.
Thank you, sir. My privilege. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will be back with more on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.